On a warm September morning in 2016, in the small town of Travelers Rest, South Carolina, a young woman named Kala Brown simply vanished. She was 29 years old, employed at a local cleaning service, and had texted her mother the night before about plans to help a friend with a property cleanup job. The text arrived at 7:43 p.m. By the following evening, when Kala failed to show up for work and stopped answering her phone, her mother knew something was catastrophically wrong. The job Kala had mentioned was supposed to take only a few hours. The property she was heading to sat on 95 acres of dense woodland, owned by a registered individual with a history that made investigators uncomfortable from the very first day. What happened on that property, hidden behind chain-link fencing and no trespassing signs, would not be discovered for 65 days. And when the truth finally emerged, it would reveal something far darker than a simple disappearance. Where was Kala Brown, and what had she walked into that September morning? Travelers Rest sits in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, a town of fewer than 5,000 people where everyone knows their neighbors and strangers are noticed immediately. The downtown consists of a single main street lined with local shops, a diner that serves breakfast all day, and a hardware store that has been family-owned for 3 generations. Beyond the town center, the roads narrow and wind through thick forests of oak and pine, past properties marked by rusted mailboxes and long gravel driveways that disappear into the trees. It is the kind of place where people move to escape the noise of cities, where privacy is respected and questions are rarely asked about what happens behind closed gates. Kala Brown had lived in Travelers Rest most of her life. She was known as someone who worked hard, kept to herself, and had a close relationship with her mother. She had struggled with some difficulties in recent years, small troubles that are common in rural towns where opportunities are limited and the economy is unforgiving, but she was trying to rebuild. Her job at the cleaning service was steady work, and she showed up on time, did what was asked, and never complained. Those who worked alongside her said she was quiet but friendly, the kind of person who would help if you needed it and never expected anything in return. On August 31, 2016, Kala received a call from someone she knew casually, a man named Charles David Carver. He was 32 years old, worked odd jobs around the area, and had recently started seeing Kala. They were not in a serious relationship, but they spent time together, and Kala trusted him enough to answer when he called. That evening, Charlie told Kala about a job opportunity. A man he knew, someone who owned a large property outside town, needed help clearing brush and cleaning up an old building. The pay would be cash, and the work would only take a day, maybe 2. Charlie asked if Kala wanted to come along. She agreed. At 7:43 p.m., Kala sent a text message to her mother. The message was brief, mentioning the job and saying she would be staying over at the property to finish the work early the next morning. Her mother replied, telling her to be safe and to call when she was done. Morrison read the message. She never responded. The property they were heading to belonged to a man named Todd Christopher Colehep. He was 45 years old, a registered individual with a conviction from decades earlier, a crime committed when he was a teenager that had sent him away for 14 years. He had been released, had moved to South Carolina, and had somehow managed to build a successful career in the years since. He owned a business, drove expensive vehicles, and had purchased the 95-acre property in Woodruff, South Carolina, about 30 minutes from Travelers Rest. The property was remote, accessible only by a single narrow road that twisted through the woods and ended at a locked gate. Todd had built a home there, along with several outbuildings and storage containers. He kept the place heavily secured, with cameras, motion sensors, and warnings posted along the fence line. Clear's throat on the morning of September 1, the weather was clear and warm, the kind of late summer day where the heat arrives early and lingers. Birds called from the trees. The property was silent except for the hum of insects and the occasional rustling of leaves. Kala and Charlie arrived sometime around mid-morning. They parked near one of the metal storage containers that sat on the property, large rectangular units used for shipping, now repurposed as storage or makeshift structures. Todd was there waiting for them. He showed them what needed to be done, pointing toward the brush that needed clearing, the tools they could use. He was polite, businesslike. He offered them water and told them to take their time. At some point that morning, everything changed. The exact moment is unknown. There were no witnesses. No one heard anything unusual. No one saw anything that would raise alarm. But by noon, Kala Brown and Charlie Carver had disappeared. Their phones stopped transmitting signals. Their social media accounts went silent. The messages they had been sending to friends and family throughout the morning simply stopped. And on that 95-acre property, behind locked gates and surveillance cameras, something unspeakable had begun. By the evening of September 2, when Kala failed to show up for her shift at work, her mother called the Spartanburg County authorities. She explained that Kala had gone to a property for a job, that she had not heard from her daughter in over 24 hours, and that this was not like Kala at all. The dispatcher took down the information and said someone would look into it. Charlie Carver's family also reported him missing. They told investigators that Charlie had mentioned going to help someone with property work, but they did not have an exact location. They only knew it was somewhere outside Travelers Rest, somewhere in the woods. Search efforts began immediately, but were hampered by the lack of specific information. Kala's phone had last pinged near Woodruff, but the area was vast and heavily wooded. Investigators canvassed gas stations, convenience stores, and nearby properties, showing photos of Kala and Charlie, asking if anyone had seen them. No one had. Volunteers organized search parties, walking through fields and forests, calling out their names. Days turned into weeks. The searches continued, but leads were scarce. The case was active, but it was also stuck. And on that property in Woodruff, behind chain-link and cameras, Kala Brown was still alive, locked inside one of those metal shipping containers, chained and alone in the dark. Part 2. The initial investigation into the disappearance of Kala Brown and Charlie Carver was methodical and thorough, but it lacked a clear direction. The Spartanburg County investigative team, working alongside local agencies, began by retracing every known movement of the missing pair in the days leading up to their disappearance. They interviewed Kala's coworkers, her friends, anyone who might have had recent contact with her. They spoke to Charlie's family and employers. Everyone said the same thing. Both Kala and Charlie had mentioned a job, a property cleanup, but no one knew exactly where. The digital trail was equally frustrating. Kala's phone had stopped transmitting at approximately 12:47 p.m. on September 1, its last known location placing it within a 3-mile radius of Woodruff. Charlie's phone went dark at nearly the same time. Investigators subpoenaed records from the service providers and began mapping cell tower data, but the area was rural, towers were spaced far apart, and the signals were imprecise. The phones could have been anywhere within that zone, or they could have been destroyed. Search teams expanded their efforts. Volunteers from the community, some of whom had never met Kala or Charlie, showed up every morning to walk grid patterns through the woods. They carried sticks to push aside brush, called out names until their voices went hoarse, and returned each evening exhausted and empty-handed. Local media covered the story, broadcasting photos of the missing pair and asking anyone with information to come forward. Tips trickled in, but none led anywhere. Someone claimed to have seen a couple matching their description at a rest stop 40 miles away. Another caller insisted they had seen them getting into a dark-colored truck at a gas station. Investigators followed every lead, all of them dead-ended. As the investigation continued, a name began to surface repeatedly in interviews: Todd Christopher Kohlhepp. Multiple people mentioned that Charlie Carver had done work for Todd in the past, small jobs like moving equipment or clearing brush. Kala's mother remembered hearing the name once or twice in passing. Investigators pulled Todd's information and immediately noted the conviction from years earlier, the registration status, and the large property he owned in Woodruff. On September 7, 6 days after Kala and Charlie disappeared, 2 deputies drove out to Todd's property to ask him some questions. The property was exactly as described: remote, heavily secured, and unwelcoming. The driveway was gated and locked. Deputies had to call Todd on his cell phone and ask him to come let them in. He arrived 20 minutes later, driving a black pickup truck with oversized tires and tinted windows. He unlocked the gate and greeted the deputies politely, asking how he could help. They asked if he knew Kala Brown or Charlie Carver. He said he did. Charlie had worked for him a few times, small jobs here and there. He had not seen him recently, though. The deputies asked if Charlie had been at the property on or around September 1. Todd shook his head. He said Charlie had not been there in weeks, maybe longer. He could not remember exactly. The deputies asked if they could look around. Todd hesitated, then agreed, but only to the immediate area around the house. He explained that the property was large, and he did not want people wandering around unsupervised. He had expensive equipment stored in various locations, and he was concerned about liability. The deputies walked the grounds near the main house, peered into a few sheds, and saw nothing unusual. They thanked Todd for his cooperation and left. In their report, they noted that Todd had been cooperative but seemed nervous. He had answered their questions, but his body language was stiff, and he avoided direct eye contact. Still, there was no evidence of wrongdoing, no probable cause to search further. Clear's throat. As September turned into October, the investigation began to lose momentum. There were no new leads, no witnesses, no physical evidence. Kala and Charlie had simply vanished. Investigators continued to follow up on tips, but the case was slowly going cold. The media coverage dwindled. The search parties grew smaller. Families were left waiting, hoping, and fearing the worst. Those who knew Todd Kohlhepp said he was an odd man, someone who kept to himself and did not socialize much. He had moved to South Carolina years earlier and had built a career selling properties. He was successful, by all accounts, owning multiple parcels of land and earning a comfortable living. But people who worked with him noticed things. He had a temper that could flare unexpectedly. He made comments that seemed inappropriate or unsettling. He once posted on social media about his property, describing it as a place where he could do whatever he wanted without anyone bothering him. The post was meant to be humorous, perhaps, but it left some people uncomfortable. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about the visit to Todd's property. Something had felt off, they said, though they could not articulate exactly what. The way Todd had controlled where they could walk. The way he had watched them constantly, even as he smiled and answered their questions. The fact that the property was so isolated, so large, and so meticulously secured. But feelings are not evidence, and without probable cause, there was nothing more they could do. By mid-October, the case files for Kala Brown and Charlie Carver were still open, but active investigation had slowed to a near stop. The families continued to call, asking for updates. Investigators had little to tell them. The search continued, but hope was fading. And on that property, Kala Brown remained locked inside a shipping container, wondering if anyone was still looking for her. Part 3. The silent 65 days is a long time to be alone in the dark. For Kala Brown, those 65 days stretched into an eternity measured not in hours or minutes, but in the sound of her own breathing, the metallic echo of chains when she moved, and the suffocating weight of uncertainty. She did not know if anyone was searching for her. She did not know if her mother was still alive, if Charlie was somewhere nearby, or if she would ever see daylight again. The container was windowless, the air stale and thick. Time became meaningless. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the gnawing suspicion that something terrible has happened but cannot prove it, the weeks following a disappearance are a special kind of torment. Kala's mother, whose name was not widely publicized to protect her privacy, spent every waking moment replaying the last conversation she had with her daughter. The text message at 7:43 p.m. The casual tone, the assumption that everything was fine. She called the investigators daily, asking if there were updates, if they had checked the property again, if they had spoken to that man Todd. The investigators were patient, but their answers were always the same. They were doing everything they could. Charlie Carver's family experienced the same agony. His mother told reporters that Charlie was a good person who had made mistakes in the past, but was trying to turn his life around. She said he would never just disappear without telling anyone. She believed something had happened to him, something terrible, and she could not understand why no one seemed to be able to find him. As October became November, the media attention faded almost entirely. New stories took precedence. The public moved on, but the families did not. They organized their own searches, printed flyers, and posted them around Travelers Rest in Woodruff. They created social media pages dedicated to finding Kala and Charlie, sharing photos, and asking anyone with information to come forward. The pages were active for a few weeks, then slowly went quiet as engagement dropped and hope dimmed. Investigators, meanwhile, continued to work the case in the background. They reviewed Todd Kohlhepp's history more thoroughly, pulling records from his past, looking for patterns or connections. What they found was troubling. The conviction from decades earlier had been violent in nature, a crime committed when Todd was 15 years old. He had been released after serving his sentence, had registered as required, and had somehow rebuilt his life. But the nature of that original offense raised questions. Investigators also discovered that Todd had purchased the Woodruff property in 2013 and had spent considerable money developing it, installing fencing, cameras, and security measures far beyond what was typical for a rural property. On November 3, 2016, a break in the case came from an unexpected source. A woman who had briefly dated Todd Kohlhepp months earlier contacted investigators. She told them that Todd had once shown her the property and that she had felt uncomfortable there. He had shown her around, pointed out the shipping containers, and made a comment that she found disturbing. He had said, half joking, that the containers were soundproof and that you could do anything inside them and no one would hear. She had laughed nervously at the time, assuming he was kidding. But after hearing about the missing couple and remembering that Charlie had worked for Todd, she began to wonder. She gave investigators her account, and they added it to the file. It was not enough for a warrant, not yet, but it was another piece of the puzzle, another reason to keep Todd Kohlhepp on their radar. As November turned into early December, something else happened that would eventually prove crucial. A property owner adjacent to Todd's land reported hearing strange noises coming from the direction of Todd's property late at night. Banging sounds, mechanical noises, the rumble of heavy equipment. The neighbor did not think much of it at the time, assuming Todd was doing construction work. But when investigators later interviewed the neighbor, the detail would become significant. Clear's throat for Kala Brown, the days blurred together. She had no way of knowing how much time had passed. She survived on the minimal food and water provided, rationed carefully because she never knew when more would come. She fought to stay mentally present, to not give in to despair. She thought about her mother constantly. She prayed, she waited. And then on a cold November morning, a sound she had not heard in weeks, a vehicle approaching. The container door opened. Light flooded in, blinding after so long in darkness. And standing in the doorway was Todd Kohlhepp, holding supplies and wearing that same calm expression he always wore. He told her that everything was fine, that she just needed to be patient a little longer. He closed the door. The darkness returned. For those who have ever felt truly helpless, who have wondered if anyone is coming to save you, the cruelty of hope is almost worse than hopelessness. Every sound becomes a possibility. Every moment is a question. Is this when someone finds me? Is today the day? Kala did not know that investigators were still looking. She did not know that her mother had not given up. She did not know that the case was about to break wide open in a way no one expected. Part 4. The revelation on November 3, 2016, investigators with the Spartanburg County Office made a decision. They had enough circumstantial evidence, enough concerning details about Todd Kohlhepp and his property, to justify taking another look. The tip from the woman he had dated, combined with the cell phone data placing Kala and Charlie near Woodruff on the day they disappeared, and the fact that Charlie had worked for Todd in the past, all pointed in the same direction. They needed to search that property. The legal process for obtaining a warrant is meticulous and requires demonstrable probable cause. Investigators compiled everything they had: witness statements, phone records, Todd's history, the neighbor's report of unusual noises. They presented the case to a judge, arguing that there was sufficient reason to believe evidence related to the disappearance might be on the property. On November 3, the warrant was granted. At approximately 2:00 p.m. that afternoon, a convoy of law enforcement vehicles drove down the narrow road leading to Todd Kohlhepp's property. There were deputies from Spartanburg County, agents from the State Investigative Division, and a tactical team prepared for any scenario. They stopped at the locked gate. Todd was not home. Using the authority granted by the warrant, they cut the lock and entered the property. The search began systematically. Teams spread out across the 95 acres, moving through the wooded areas, checking outbuildings, examining the storage containers. The property was larger and more complex than they had anticipated. There were multiple structures, piles of equipment, and dense vegetation that made visibility difficult. Hours passed. The sun began to set. Officers used flashlights and portable lights to continue the search. At approximately 4:30 p.m., one of the deputies approached a shipping container near the rear of the property, away from the main house and partially hidden by trees. The container was padlocked from the outside. The deputy called out, asking if anyone was inside. For a moment there was silence. Then faintly, a voice responded. It was a woman's voice, weak but unmistakable. She said, "Help me, please help me." The deputy radioed immediately. Within minutes, multiple officers converged on the container. They cut the lock and pulled open the heavy metal door. Inside, chained by the neck to the interior wall of the container, was Kala Brown. She was emaciated, disoriented, and terrified, but she was alive. Officers immediately called for medical assistance and began the process of freeing her from the restraints. Kala was crying, asking about her mother, asking if she was safe now. The officers assured her that she was. They asked if there was anyone else on the property. Kala told them about Charlie Carver. She told them what Todd had told her. Charlie was gone. He was not alive anymore. Clear's throat within the hour. Todd Kohlhepp arrived at the property, apparently unaware that law enforcement was there. When he saw the vehicles, he attempted to flee but was quickly apprehended by the tactical team. He was placed under arrest immediately. Officers read him his rights. Todd said nothing. As darkness fell on November 3, investigators began the grim task of searching the property for evidence of what had happened to Charlie Carver. Using cadaver canines and ground-penetrating equipment, they focused on areas where the soil appeared disturbed. In the early hours of November 4, they located remains buried on the property. The remains were later confirmed to be those of Charlie Carver. He had been gone since September 1, within hours of arriving at the property. Kala Brown was transported to a local medical facility, where she was treated for malnutrition, dehydration, and the physical trauma of being restrained for 65 days. She was interviewed by investigators over the following days, providing detailed accounts of what had happened. She described arriving at the property with Charlie on September 1. She described Todd producing a firearm and restraining them both. She described being locked in the container while Charlie was taken elsewhere. She described hearing a sound that she believed was a shot. She described the weeks that followed, the isolation, the fear, and the moments when she thought she would not survive. The case against Todd Kohlhepp moved swiftly. He was charged initially with abduction and unlawful restraint. As the investigation deepened and remains were recovered, additional charges followed. But the revelations did not stop there. As investigators continued to process the property and interview Todd, something even more disturbing emerged. Todd began making statements about other events, other crimes that had never been solved. He mentioned a case from 2003, an incident at a shop in a nearby county where multiple individuals had been targeted and lost their lives. That case had been cold for 13 years. Investigators reopened it immediately. Over the following weeks, Todd Kohlhepp confessed to a total of 7 losses of life, including Charlie Carver. The confessions were methodical, detailed, and chilling. He described the cases as if recounting mundane events, showing little emotion and less remorse. Investigators were able to corroborate many of his statements with evidence from the scenes and the property. The scope of what he had done, and for how long he had done it undetected, shocked even experienced investigators. The media coverage of Kala's rescue was immediate and extensive. National outlets picked up the story. The image of the shipping container, the details of her captivity, and the fact that she had survived 65 days in those conditions captured public attention. Kala's mother appeared in interviews, expressing gratitude to the investigators who had not given up, and relief that her daughter was alive. She also spoke about Charlie Carver, saying that his family deserved justice and that she hoped they could find some peace. Todd Kohlhepp's trial was a formality. Faced with overwhelming evidence, multiple confessions, and the testimony of Kala Brown, he agreed to a resolution that would spare him the possibility of execution. In May 2017, he was sentenced to multiple consecutive life terms without the possibility of release. He was taken to a maximum security facility where he remains today. Kala Brown, for her part, has worked to rebuild her life, though the scars of those 65 days remain. Closing the case of Kala Brown and Charlie Carver is a reminder that darkness can exist in the most unexpected places, hidden behind ordinary facades and locked gates. It is a reminder that investigations must persist even when leads dry up, that families who refuse to give up hope are sometimes the only reason cases are solved, and that survival, even in the most unimaginable circumstances, is possible. Kala Brown lived because she did not give up, and because investigators did not stop looking. Charlie Carver's family received answers, though not the ones they had hoped for. Justice in this case was served, but the questions remain. How many times did people pass that property and never know what was happening inside? How many opportunities were there to stop what was occurring before it went as far as it did? The answers are uncomfortable, but they are necessary. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.